Okay, so we're holding the Mishnah of page Ches Amud Aleph. Let's bring up the text. Hey Josh, we're holding Ches Amud Aleph at the top of the Mishnah, the top of the page of the Mishnah. Let me see where we are. Here we go. I think this is it. Oops. Hold on, we got it wrong over here. Let's share this again, hold on. Here we are. Okay, we're holding the Mishnah. Okay, we're holding it looks like a difficult few Mishnah, a few Daf Gemara. The Mishnah is over here going now into, we started off the comparisons and differences between things that are kind of similar. We started off with Megillah because the similarities between and the differences between Adar Rishon and Adar Sheni in leap year, which is coming up next year. And from there, we're going on to different halachas in Torah that are similar. Now, unlike how we learned Gemara up until now, we learned primarily the Gemara, especially in Sanhedrin Rosh Hashanah, which we try to do a little Taisvus now. Taisvus in over here are kind of complicated, so we'll see how far we could get, because the difference over here in Megillah is a lot of halacha. Okay, so here we're holding the Mishnah is talking about. Hopefully, so you gotta put on your thinking caps today. So today the Mishnah is like this: Ein ben amudar hana mechaveroi lemudar mimenu meichel. If a person makes a vow not to benefit, whatever, not going to know why someone makes such a vow, that I won't benefit anything from you, I don't have anything to do with you. So if a person says, I don't want to have anything to do with the person at all, or if the person says, I don't want to take anything food related to you. And there's machlokes and Shimon Levi and others about what's the term used in the neder when it comes to food. Are we talking about a person says no food related things or specifically to eat? This one of the halachas brings down, the Rambam brings down an example is where, let's say, a person is being, someone's nudging a person, keeps on asking them to come and eat over. Okay, so whatever reason you don't want to eat over, so you say, I made a vow I can never eat by you. So what does it mean I made a vow I can never eat by you? What is included in that vow? So the Mishnah says, if a person's vow is not to take any pleasure from the person, or the person says, I vow not to take any food-related pleasure, the difference is only drisas regel, to actually stepping foot in the person's property. Otherwise, everything else you can't take benefit. Why? You have to remember something. When a person says, I'm not going to take any pleasure of food by you, in it is included, maybe the person doesn't realize this, that if I'm not eating by you, I have to eat by someone else. I have to eat by myself. I have to acquire my own food. So anything that's connected to a benefit, that by benefiting from you, I'm saving money or saving time or effort from acquiring my own food. So you're participating in my achila, my food. So therefore, when it comes to kelim, v'kelim she'naisim meichel nefesh, or vessels that have no food related, and like Rashi is going to add, these are kelim vessels, utensils that are not typically, that are given out for free. Otherwise, given out for free, you wouldn't pay for it, because if you'd have to rent the vessels, even if they're not for ochel nefesh, and here he's giving it to you, or she's giving it to you for free, so now you're using money, you're saving money, and that money you could buy food. So then that person indirectly is helping you with the food. So that's what the Mishnah is saying. Seemingly, it seems like a person is making two totally different statements. I don't have anything to do with you, or I don't want to take any pleasure from you. I don't want to have any enjoyment from you, which would make sense. That includes nothing from you, or I don't want to have any food from you. So that's what I'm saying. In Rabbi Shua ben Levi brings down in the Gemara, it says that he says the terminology in Gemara Nedarim says that Rabbi Shua ben Levi says hanoha mevil de meichel, that any kind of food that will bring to eating, any kind of pleasure that will bring to eating. Then that kind of, that's a very broad statement, and therefore anything that I save money on is also included. So the two differences is Drisas Regal. I could go into a person's property that I say I don't want to eat by them. Is I could go into their property because I didn't. It's not doesn't and we can see what that means. Drisas Regal, and also utensils or vessels that are not food related. Say a hammer. But if someone would rent their hammer out, then it's a problem because then I'm benefiting from it indirectly affects my food because now that I'm getting it for free, I could go buy myself a sandwich. Okay, so Rashi says, "Ein hamudar na moider ana chomer mi moider Michael." So Rashi, of course, tells us that a person who makes a vow to not take any delight or pleasure from a person is more strict. I mean, the person wants to have less to do. Hey, Bruce, on page 8a, more than if a person says, I don't want to eat by you. So here we're learning the laws. Again, we're continuing, the mission is continuing with taking subjects that are seemingly similar to show us the differences. And we started off with the first Adar and the second Adar with regard to Purim. And now we're talking about a person who, again, whatever the reason is, decides to make a vow to have no pleasure from the next person. So one part of the vow is that I take no pleasure, versus I take no pleasure in food. Hold on a second, guys. My computer froze a second. Okay, I take no pleasure in food. So Rashi says, when I take no pleasure at all is more strict than a person says, I take no pleasure in food. What would be the difference? So the Mishnah says, the only difference is that if someone says, I don't want to take any food from you, or food-related things like Reb Shub and Levi says, then you could go to their house and visit. Or you could take a hammer from them because it's not food-related. But you can't take a pot from them because the pot is you use to cook. Drisas Regel. So Rashi says, what's Drisas Regel? Drisas Regel means if you say, I don't want to take any pleasure from you, means you can't visit the person. Because visiting the person is some sort of pleasurable interaction between people socially, and you can't go into their property, their house or their property. Whereas if I say I don't want to eat I don't have anything food related to you, okay, I could go visit you. We could sit down and have a conversation. We didn't talk about social interactions outside of food related things. Now here Rashi tells us another. So that's one thing. So one thing is you could go to their property, or if you say you don't have anything to do with them, you can't go to the property. Here Rashi adds something. The Mishnah says the second thing. The kelim she'ein oisem b'moichel nefesh, utensils, vessels or utensils that are not food related, muter lahashra lemoider Michael. You could lend to someone who takes a vow not to have anything food related. So if let's say person A vows to not have anything food related pleasure from B could lend A something that's not food related. Like I could say like a hammer, a saw, a lawnmower, right? These are not, but you can't, could I borrow from them the basket to go apple picking? No, because apple picking is food related. Now Rashi adds to this. Only in a case where a person would lend for free the hammer. But if these are utensils that otherwise you would have to pay for them, and typically you would have to rent someone's lawnmower or rent someone's hammer and pay. So now the person's doing you a favor and lending you their hammer for free, i.e. you're saving money. In a place where you would have to rent and pay money for these utensils, even though these utensils are not food related, then it's still forbidden. The kol hana, because when a person says, that's why you have to be careful. A lot of times people say things, I never want to have anything to do with you. First of all, you have to be careful. Saying a statement, I never want to have anything to do with you, could be almost kind of putting a vow over there. So that's why before Rosh Hashanah, we disavow all our vows. Why? Because we say a lot of things that we don't mean. And okay, even though we're not going into the laws of vows now in the detail, where a person has to really mean what they're saying, but you still have to be careful what you say. So here, if a person says, I don't want to have anything to do food related, so Rashi says, Kol hana she'im lo hano zeh hayimachseba prutas hana machseba pruta hanos meicheli. If anything, that if you give me benefit, I save money, even if though the benefit has nothing to do with food, like borrowing someone's hammer. But if I typically would have to rent someone's hammer for $10, and now that I saved the $10 because you lent it to me, I could go and buy myself a tuna fish sandwich. That's food related, because by the by, it's food related. I benefit from you lending me the hammer. I save money. Now that I save money, I can use that money towards food. Because I could take that money and buy food. So therefore, again, that's what the Mishnah says. The only thing that you could really do is just go visit the person or walk through their property, or borrow things that would typically be given always for free. People will never, for example, a hammer is something, right? I was recently I was watching someone. I needed scissors, for what do they call them? Gardener scissors. And I saw someone have it outside. I mean, there's certain things that people lend, and there's certain things that are rented typically. So if someone usually rents a car, and someone gives you the car for free, so then you saved money. Okay. Now in the halacha, we talk about this all the time about vessels that are typically rented, typically sold, typically there's different levels of what we have, different things that are typically lent out or not lent out. But the rule basically Rashi says is, now again, Rabbi Shua ben Levi puts one condition where the person says any pleasure that brings to food. But if a person literally says that I don't want to eat by you, I don't want to eat your food, then it's only food. It's not money that's saved or vessels that are because sometimes a person just says, I make a vow, I'm never going to eat by you. That's something different than if a person says, I take a vow never to have anything food related from you. Okay, so Taisus basically repeats what Rashi says. Chas v'shalom not repeats, but he says it in his own words. Avadrisis haregel v'kelim she'ein oisim ha'meichel nefesh demoider hana osir behem umoider meichel muter. But vessels that are not, Taisus says, are not food related. So someone who says, I don't want to take any pleasure, so that's taking someone's hammer as pleasure. But something that's not food related, then it's permitted if you only vow against food. Now, the Malkim she'ein maskirim, it's only in a place like Rashi says that you don't rent it out. Al Malkim shemaskirim v'pruta. But if you rent it out for a small amount of significance, we know a pruta is a value of a significance. A pruta doesn't mean a penny. A pruta means something that's the nekud of a pruta is something you could buy oichel nefesh. You could buy minimal amount of food to eat. So in general, the rule by Jews is, this is an interesting halacha, by Jews versus Gentiles, that a Jew will always be forgiving on a pruta. A pruta is not money to a Jewish person, and therefore to even steal less than a pruta or anything, a pruta is, we don't start putting value up to a pruta. I don't know we have to check what a pruta would be in today's money, but it's a kind of a little bit significant. But if a person would rent it for not like a 25 cents, but a pruta, let's say a pruta is $5, is asra afilu b'moider Michael, the Oisei Pruta, Roy Liknes Michael. But if a person would typically rent it out and doing you a favor, giving you the hammer or the lawnmower for free, and because you saved money, you could buy food, then you're not allowed to take that hammer from the person. But here Taisus adds to Rashi. But if it's a food-related item, even if they would never rent it out, and you're not saving money, but it you in preparing your food, let's say a knife or a peeler, what have you, you can't borrow it from someone, even though no one would rent a peeler out. It's a normal thing to borrow a peeler. So I'm not saving money, but it's a regular utensil used for food. So if I say that I don't have anything food related, I can't go borrow your kitchen knife or your peeler or your blender or your hot water heater, for hot water for Shabbos. So therefore, because that's all food related, and if it's food related, then Tosfos says then it's not about that you're saving money because it's actually part of your food preparations. Okay, Rav Shein's is going to bring us down the halacha in the Shulchan Aruch Yeridea, which talks about these laws. One for whom it is prohibited to derive benefit in a way that you made a vow from another's possessions, it's prohibited to pass through his friend's property. If you're not allowed to take benefit, you can't even take a shortcut. Forget about coming to visit me. You can't even walk through my field to get someplace else, even if it does not shorten his path. And here the Taz and the Shach add that even if you don't even benefit, in theory you could have walked around, or the other way would be just as fast. So I didn't really gain anything. Let's say you're having a conversation with someone. So you want to continue the conversation. That person's walking through the other guy's yard. You want to walk with that person through the yard. So you can't, because even though you could go the other way and be the same, but you can't go through that person's property. He may not even go through his friend's fields during the summer, when people typically overlook trespassing in their fields. In the winter, where people are trying to grow, so then of course they wouldn't want people in their fields. But in summer, when the fields are just empty, people usually don't care. It's mamish. This is what we're going to get to. There's mamish. There's no person's Michael. It's almost as if I don't own the property. Likewise, he may not borrow any vessel from his friend if he's prohibited by vow from deriving benefit from another's food. It is prohibited to eat his food for sure. That's also, we can't eat the food. If one said benefit from your food is prohibited for me, he may not eat the food. However, he may use the vessels used in preparing the food. So here the Shulchan Aruch quotes what Rabbi Shua ben Levi says. It's different if a person says, I don't want to take any benefit food related, or if I don't want to eat any of your food. If I don't want to eat any of your food, then I could take things that are food related. If he said benefit that leads to food is prohibited for me, he may neither eat the food nor benefit from any vessel that's typically rented or used for food, like Tosfos adds. Okay, so this is all on the Mishnah. So we have, again, this is, it seems like an odd scenario, but we have to remember, this is what people do sometimes. People sometimes, unfortunately, why they do it, I don't know. People say, I make a vow, I'm never visiting you. You can never visit me again. Or I don't have anything to do with you. These are all kind of ways where a person wants to disconnect from the next person. If you take a vow, then what you have to know what that includes. Okay. So now the Gemara says like this. Based on what you're saying, the Mishnah, that everyone agrees that both the person who says, I don't want to take any benefit from you, or food-related benefit, so utensils that are food-related, you can't borrow. Everyone agrees to that. The Gemara says, so he says like Tosfos, even if you don't rent it, it's included in food-related. So Reb Steinsaltz adds, and the Jerusalem Talmud explains that there is a distinction to be made between utensils in which food is prepared, in other words, a sieve, a sifter, which would be prohibited to one who is prohibited by vow from deriving benefit from another's food, and vessels in which food is merely placed, in other words, cups, plates, which are permitted even to that person. It doesn't say in Rabbi Steinsaltz, in the English here at least, again, this English translation, which probably from Rabbi Steinsaltz, was translated from his Hebrew. So you always have to, if you have a doubt in understanding Rabbi Steinsaltz's English, check the Hebrew version. But what he's saying over here, that the Yerushalmi says, I don't know if he means in the case where what Tosfos says, but he said before in the Halacha, where he says no food, or if he says no food related, then you could still use a cup and a plate. It doesn't say in which scenario. I'm assuming he means in all cases, even if he says food related, you could still use cups and plates, which are permitted. The only things you can't use are sieve and sifter, which would be things that prepare food versus things that hold food. What would be about pots or let's say what do you have different things that you store food in. Storing food in cups and plates may be different also. I'm not sure if storing food is a sieve and sifter or storing food is a cup and plate. But also, we're not sure, it's not so clear from Rabbi Steinsaltz's footnote over here, if this Yerushalmi is going on a case where a person says food related, because if food related, and we said that even a benefit of renting, so you'd have to be a case where there's plates that you would lend for free, so you're not saving any money, and still this is not considered food related because it's just holding the food, it's not preparing the food. Okay, that has to be examined in the halacha. Okay, now what's drisas regel? What does it mean? Drisas regel halai kapti enashi. So the Gemara says, one second, that now we're going to go into a very complicated scenario. The complicated scenario is like this. When a person says, I don't want to derive any benefit from you, okay, we're not talking about the food, we're talking about any benefit. And we said if any benefit means you can't even pass through the person's property. But a person doesn't care if you walk through his property. You're not. It means what is, again, like we spoke last week. What is forbidden over here? Forbidden is taking pleasure that you're benefiting, or taking pleasure in kind of an interaction where the person's giving you something. So if a person's giving you something like permission to walk through my field, so there's a relationship. I'm giving you permission to pass through my field. But if a person, like the Gemara says, like kapti inashi, people don't care. They're not checking their video cameras. I got a phone call. I rent an apartment. So the building that I rent the apartment is obligated to take care of our yard, but they weren't taking care of the yard for 6 months. So we have a daughter who's special needs, and she maybe could get in the yard, run around the yard and get involved. So we needed a gardener. So I called the gardener. The second I called the gardener, came through the house, I got a phone call from the landlord who was evidently checking my cameras. I'm not sure why, and said, "Did you just call a gardener?" So it means that he's sitting there watching his camera. I don't know if he's sitting at his desk. It's still, I can't figure out the scenario of this case. But the point is, most people don't care. They're not checking to see who's walking through their property. So there's no relationship with the person because you pass through someone's field. So drisas regular, like inchi. No, a person is not makbid. Is not concerned if you, what's the English word to use? Are not particular. You're not particular if you pass through my field. So it shouldn't even be considered deriving any pleasure from that person. It's almost as if there's no ownership on that pleasure that you're taking from that person. So Amar Rava says no. That Muhammani, who's this? Rabbi Lezer. This is Rabbi Lezer. The Amar Viter Aser b'mudar ana. That even if a person is overlooking something, and therefore typically it doesn't mean anything, in the case where you disavow pleasure from a person, you're still not allowed to do it. Now, why is this significant? This is what Tosfos gets into. In Halacha, in the law, we pay attention to when a person's particular about something. For instance, in the laws of Chazakah, the laws of Chazakah means when a person wants to later claim ownership based on behaviors. A person says, if a person lives in someone's house for 3 years, and after 3 years, right, everyone knows Cheskas Abatim, the Gemara in Bava Basra, after 3 years, the person says, "You get out of my house." He says, "What do you mean? I bought the house from you." So he said, "Where's your contract?" "I lost my contract." He says, "So prove that you." So he said, "Well, it's my house." He goes, "Well, why didn't you say anything for 3 years?" That's called a chazaka. A person's particular if someone lives in their house. The Gemara says that if after 3 years the person doesn't protest at any point, doesn't make a note to the Beis Din, doesn't send a message, doesn't send a lawyer's letter, means that the claim is a claim. And if a person has a taina that I bought it from you, the fact that you were living in his property or her property is a person would be makbid. But if a person does something for 3 years on something that a person wouldn't be particular about, then that's not a sign of a chazaka. Because I didn't protest, because I don't care. For instance, if I say I walk every day to work through your field, it's a sign that I own the field. No, I never protested because I don't care if you walk through my field. But you can't claim ownership because you walk through my field. Because you say you bought it, and to prove that you bought it, I didn't protest. So something that a person's not makbid on has no value. And it's not a sign of anything. So seemingly, if it has no values to the point even in chazaka, so therefore the Gemara asks the question, that why is that considered hana? You're not giving that. If a person's not particular, he's not giving you anything. And Rabbi Lezer says, in the case of hana, in the case of vowing not to take pleasure from the person, not being particular is still a problem, because at the end of the day is you're benefiting. Again, the question I think comes down to when a person makes a vow to not have a relationship with a person, is that about having an interaction, or just I'm not benefiting from you? It doesn't make a difference if I'm not particular, if I don't even know that you're benefiting from me. If I say I don't want to benefit from you, I can't take any benefit. And if walking through your property, even if it's not shorter, is a benefit, for whatever reason I want to do it, you can't do it. And that's only a single opinion of Rabbi Elazar. Okay. So the Gemara says, if a person's not particular, so why if I make a vow not to take pleasure, is that considered taking pleasure? The person doesn't care. He's not particular, so I'm not taking anything from that person. So the Gemara answers, who is that opinion of Rabbi Elazar, who says, even for a regular person, I would care less. I'm not even. I have no cameras in this field because I don't care if people are walking through there. There's no sign that says trespassing. There was a video I saw recently, a YouTube video where someone was, I think in New Orleans, one of these places, someone was claiming, rights to the river. There's someone who's going through on a motorboat through a river, through one of these alloy, what do they call them, bayous or something, and saying, that's my water. That's just showing.
Like bayous.
Bayous. The person, yeah. There's no. You have the. That's just because it's outside your property. There's no. Show me proof that it's your property. You can't just. So the person's being mocked, but that he's driving through the water that he decided it is. But most people in cases that they're not. So why is that considered taking pleasure? Because you at the end is you're benefiting. Okay, so before we try to we're gonna go a little bit into Tosfos. I know it's a hard Tosfos. Like I said, it's a hard subject. So we're just gonna kind of, because he goes into a very interesting question, and I think Rav Steinsaltz mentions it, maybe not. Okay, so he says everyone hold their thinking caps a second. Okay, so there's another question. I just want to give an example. There's certain things that are asir b'hana. Now, there's certain things that are forbidden to take pleasure, not because you vowed, but the Torah doesn't allow. For instance, there is an asherah is a tree that used to be worshipped as an idol. That's why we have in the Beis Hamikdash, there's a law, you can't have an asherah in the Beis Hamikdash. There's some sort of idol worship that was connected to the asherah tree, where they would worship a tree. So we know that one of the laws when it comes to avodah zarah is you can't benefit from avodah zarah. You can't take any pleasure from avodah zarah. Now, if I'm walking outside someone's yard, and someone has a huge tree, and the tree has a huge shade that covers outside, it goes into, let's say let's say a Carmelist, or even if I sit under someone's private tree, a person's not going to say, "Oh, 1 second, I don't allow you to take shade from my tree because the shade is mine, and you're taking pleasure from." I have a sign that says no one's allowed to take. You walk into shul sometimes, or someone, they have a chair. It says if you sit on this chair, it's forbidden. Whatever. That's an interesting sign. But imagine someone had a sign that says that you can't sit under my tree. I don't want you to benefit from the shade of my tree. There's no such thing. It's not a value. No one would say that. The person's not particular about that. But you can't sit under an asherah tree. Why? Because it's avodah zarah. You're taking benefit from avodah zarah. The avodah zarah is giving you shade. So the Ran asks, how could you say, what's the question of the Gemara? There's that something that a person's not particular about should be mutter b'hana. If you're noider hana, if you say I'm not going to take any pleasure, we see clearly when it comes to avodah zarah, you can't sit under someone's tree, an asherah tree, a tree that's avodah zarah. So we see that it's not connected. Even if a person's not particular, still, if you're not allowed to take pleasure, so in avodah zarah you're not allowed to take pleasure because God said so. But if I make a vow, I'm not allowed to take pleasure because I said so. You decided to take upon yourself that you're never going to take pleasure from this person. So in theory, it's as if this shade is an avodah zarah, or this field is an avodah zarah. It has nothing to do with the person's particular or not. So they asked that question. The kind of answer is that we also try to figure out when the difference in Torah is that when it comes to avodah zarah, the Torah tells us what you're not allowed to do. When it comes to a vow, we also have to try to figure out what the person meant. Did the person really mean not to be able to walk through the guy's field that is just there, that everyone's walking through? Or did the person mean, I don't want to ever borrow your car from you, or don't ever lend me your coat, or don't ever say hello to me? But, I didn't mean that I can't walk through your property that everyone's walking through. So that's kind of what we're trying to figure out. But let's see this Tosfos over here. Drisis regular kapite in the Shikasha. The Gemara asks a question. In the Gemara Cheskes Abatim again, the Gemara Baba Basra, Bruce, you learned this is my dad. Ka'amar b'Gemara, the Gemara says, Eil devarim she'ein lehem chazaka. We go in to try to figure out when a person is a partner with another person. When could a person say, I bought out my partner? So what do you mean you bought out my partner? Why? Because I keep my car in our garage. Right? Let's say you have a garage, a joint garage. You have a partnership in a garage. And I keep my car in the garage. So that means it's a sign that I bought it from you. If I claim I bought from you, you have to have a taina. That's one of the rules, right? So I claim I bought from you, and the fact that my car is there's a sign. So the Gemara says not everything's a sign. Maybe a car parked in a garage is a sign, maybe it's not a sign. So the Gemara says, and there's certain things that are a sign that the person would be typically particular. And the fact that he doesn't say anything or she doesn't say anything is because you did buy it. Or it could be the fact that a person hangs their coat in the office and the person never said, why are you hanging the coat in the office? Because we both have right to hang the coat. And even if I'm stepping over my boundary of a partnership, doesn't mean I bought the house just because I'm using a bit more of the kitchen space. So one of the things the Gemara says, if I have a joint field with another person, and I bring my animal into the field, my cow into the field, the Gemara says that's not enough of a sign that you've bought the ownership from the other person, because maybe the person doesn't care that you brought the cow to the thing, therefore he never said anything. Again, the idea of chazak applies to a lot of things. It applies to partnerships. It applies to neighbor partnership. There's a big thing about neighbors. What can I say that? I opened up a supermarket in our little courtyard. No one ever said anything to me, so it means that you guys allow me to do it. You can't just now close me down. And the Gemara discusses these things. Where are there things that a person would be forgiving, but still reserve the right to protest? So one of the things, that if I'm a partner, I don't care if my partner parks his car in our field. Because we have a big field, and leaving his car there doesn't mean anything. But bringing his cow there doesn't mean anything. They give an answer. So they say, what do you mean? How could you say that a person is forgiving to have something in the field? But we know that if a person says, I won't take two partners that own a field, and they say we don't have to do with each other, and they make a vow about it, they're not allowed to go into the field because everyone owns 50% of 50% of every step of the field. So they give an answer. Misha Minina, what do we see from there? That that people care about it. And the only reason why the cow is allowed to be there is because they're partners. Otherwise, walking through someone's property is a problem. So why are we saying over here that the people are not makbid? There's another case in Beitza that talks about the case of Yom Tov. There's a lot of cases, there's a lot of questions. This is a Tosfos that takes a lot of scenarios. But there's a lot of cases where sometimes you would feel, for instance, the Oile Bavel. I think the case in Beitza is the Oile Bavel. There's public, what is the definition of public fountains? Is public fountains a partnership or public fountains hefker? Right? When something's public and everyone can use it, is it a partnership that everyone has a partnership in the fountain and therefore everyone could use it? Or is it a situation where it's no one's fountain and therefore everyone could use it? It's like hefker. And then the question is, if I pick up water, can I take it for someone else? If I'm taking it for someone else, then I'm taking away from if I'm taking for myself is one thing. If I'm taking for the next person, am I allowed to take for the next person? The person didn't ask me, and at the same time I'm stealing from the person who could have taken it before me. So we have all these cases where we're trying to figure out where in partnerships, because hefker is a certain level of partnership, or certainly partnership if the bar is a partnership, what kind of relationship do they have to each other? But we have to come down to Rabbi Lezer. That Rabbi Lezer says that even in a person who's not allowed to have pleasure, the Gemara has to answer that in the case where you say you can't go into my field, then Rabbi Lezer says a person's not going to be mivater. The question we're trying to ask from our Gemara is not talking about partnership. Our Gemara is talking about just any person walking through my field. And we see from these Gemaras clearly that walking through someone's field is not something, it's not a chiddush. Of course you can't walk through my field because I am particular. That's one of the things I don't allow. So the Gemara answers, so we see over there, it's only talking about shutfim. But other people, a person is careful. So how could you say that a moider hana, the chiddush is that we have to come on to Rabbi Elazar? That when do we need Rabbi Elazar? Only when there's a partnership. But when there's no partnership, a person's particular. I don't want to see you in my field. There's no such thing as you could just walk into my field. But that So, but over here we're talking about just regular people that are not partners. And the argument says a person is not particular. If any person walks through my field, but we see from many other Gemaras that only partners are not careful. If I have a partnership, then I have a relationship. But if I don't have a partnership, you shouldn't be walking through my field. So how can we say that we have to come on to a chidush of Rabbi Elazar, that even though a person is not makbid, nevertheless, Rabbi Elazar says that you can't be mevater because I take a nut. So the Rebbeinu Tam answers like this: the hachimai rebika delay kapti. It depends what kind of field you're talking about. There's different levels of field. A person has different levels of properties. For instance, you have some people that they could own 5,000 acres in the middle of Montana. And if they find that one person walked through their land, they lose it. That's not normal. That's not regular. And it's a regular thing that if you have a lot of land, so yes, around your house and that you don't want to find people. You can't expect people not to go there. I think and the law in America is, maybe Bruce, you could correct me, I think people even hunt on other people's land, right? Like there's certain things you could do on other people's land that, because you can't just own acres and acres and not have people trespass. Am I right? Bruce, are you aware of anything about that?
No, I don't have any opinion about that.
I think I just read recently about something about that. There's certain things that are fields that are general fields, like a bika. Bika is like a valley. The lake kapti by shum adam. You don't care about anyone. Visfarhu leimer kain. Dumia dekelim shein oitzem meichel nefesh the mayri shein maskirim ki yotzeben the mukim the kmila of Nedarim Rabbi Elazar. So again, that even a person who takes a vessel that doesn't have to pay rent and benefits, you still can't take it from that person. Why? Because even if a person doesn't care to let everyone, even if a person has, for instance, a library. If a person has a library, they have in Seattle these libraries, in Israel also, you have these libraries but are private outside someone's house that they put books in for people to borrow. And they don't care who, they don't check, they don't care who. If you say, I don't have any pleasure from that person, you can't take the books. It means you can't take vessels even if you don't rent from them, even if it's free. You can't, and by the way, let's say a person's upset at a city. If a person's upset at a city and says, I don't want to benefit from the city, there's such a vow also, the Rambam quotes. You can't go to a public library. You can't go to the public parks. You can't benefit from anything that's tax related, something that's communal. Because even though the person is not particular, but you're saying, I don't want to benefit from the city, I can't benefit from the library. Let's see what Rebbe Steinzat says. And we're going to go to the next Mishnah. This closes out this Mishnah. Benefit is limited to situations where, due to friendship, one allows a friend to use his property. He will not allow just anyone to do so. This is what he's quoting the Tosfos. However, stepping foot in one's property with regard to which people are typically not particular might not constitute benefit. So there's a question about loy kapidinshi. Is only talking about, the Tosfos Reed says, is only talking about places where a person mamish doesn't care. But a person who doesn't care, but only for friends, that's for sure hana. And over here, the question is basically, Rabbi Steinzal says mashma, that I'm not sure if he's bringing this down to halacha, either he's arguing with Rabbi Elazar, or even in this case, Rabbi Elazar would according to Tosfos would agree that if a person doesn't care if anyone takes benefit, then it's not about friendship or not. But it seems like this is going according to Tosfos Reed, that says this is talking about the before Rabbi Elazar. The before Rabbi Elazar, that anyone could walk through a property even if you're not a friend. But in the case of Vitur Aser, Rabbi Elazar says, but when you say, I don't want to take benefit, then you can't even benefit in a way where a person will let anyone use it. Standard cases where property typically overlooked benefit occurred by others are when the weight of produce on the scale is slightly more than an amount in which a customer paid, or allowing a customer to keep a pruta of change. So the Meiri says another case of overlooking is, for instance, where it's not exactly 1 pound, or take from the penny pot. All these things where people are not careful. Sometimes you go to the butcher and he says, "Okay, just give me $5. It's $5, not $5.03." So that kind of benefit you can't really benefit. You can't benefit if you vow from not taking benefit. If you vow not to take benefit from a person, you can't even benefit the typical things that they overlook. Vitur, when a person overlooks, for you that's prohibited. Okay. That finishes out this Mishnah. Now let's go to the next Mishnah. Again, these are kind of nothing to do with Megillah, but that's how the Mishnais does it sometimes. The Mishnais will start off with Megillah and go to other subjects. So now we're going about the laws of Nedarim and Nedavos. What's Nedarim and Nedavos? Nedarim and Nedavos are two types of vows of obligations you put on yourself, not a vow to not have pleasure, but obligations you take upon yourself, specifically with regard to the temple. A person can make a vow, I'm going to bring a cow to the temple. That's one thing. Then a nadav is a donation. It's not the same thing. If you donate this cow, so seemingly it's the same thing. I have to bring a cow to the temple. But there's a big difference. The Mishnah says, Ein bein nedarim lenedavos, there's no difference if a person vows or gifts the temple. If you take a vow, then it's an obligation on you. You said, I'm going to take this cow, I'm going to give a cow to the temple. If, let's say, you have a cow and the cow dies on the way, and now the Rashi and the Machlokes, when have you fulfilled your vow? What happens if you donate a cow to the temple and on the way it dies? So everyone agrees then you're obligated to bring another cow. If I say I'm going to bring this cow to the temple and the cow dies or gets stolen or what have you, so this cow doesn't exist anymore. It's not mine. I tried to, and now it's not around anymore. That the cow died, so you don't have to replace it. A vow is an obligation on you, and a dove is an obligation on the item. If you donate an item, if the item is here, you have to give it. If it's not here anymore for whatever reason, not because you spent. If you donate it to the temple and then you go and sell it for money, that's something else. But if it's out of your hands, it dies, it was stolen, what have you, so you're not responsible anymore. You're only responsible up to a certain point. But if you take a vow to bring a cow, so that's an obligation on you. It's not even if you had in mind to bring this cow and you start taking it to the temple and it gets stolen and dies. Now, according to some opinions, it has to actually make it onto the altar. It's not enough, even if you hand it over to the Kohanim. And now it's kind of in the priest's hands. I did my job. What more could you do? I gave it to the priest. According to some opinions, you're still responsible. You have to make sure that cow, not make sure, because even if it's out of your control, it's your responsibility up until the cow actually makes it to the altar and is sacrificed. I mean, if it doesn't make it to the altar, even if it goes to the Beis Hamikdash, it's still on your responsibility. So that's what Rashi says. Rashi says, Neder and Nedavos. Mefarish b'Gemara. Neder, what is the definition of a vow? Ha'omer harei elai oila. I'm obligated on myself. I take upon myself to bring a korban oila, a burnt sacrifice to the temple. Ulachas frisha, and then you separate a cow or an animal for this oila. Some people say it's a bird. We're talking about chayiv b'achriyusa. Then if something happens to the cow or the bird, you have to replace it. Nedava, gift is harizu. This is going to be taken to the temple. You point an animal initially, but like Kibla love, and it didn't happen. So then you're not taking it upon yourself, responsible to replace it. You never said you're bringing a burnt offering or a bird or a cow. You said I'm bringing this cow, this burnt offering, this bird, and then so therefore you're not responsible. So Tosfos says, now the question is that it's not so simple because our Mishnah makes it sound as if that's the only difference. The only difference is if you're responsible, if you have a chrayis, if you're responsible for it. But there's many other differences. So why don't we mention all the differences? And the fact that the Mishnah doesn't mention all the differences makes it a little challenging. Because is the Mishnah, like the Rashba says, we're just talking about this thing, this with regards to responsibility. But other things, there's other differences. So then the Rashba makes it easy for us in the next few Mishnahs, because we're only talking about the things that we're talking about. The things that we're not talking about, then there are other differences. So but over here the Griz, Rabbi Soloveitchik, he asks, okay, he says, what's the question? It's a different type of response. Initially, it's a different type of responsibility. Okay, doesn't give the answer here. So let's see what Tosfos says. There's other differences. If a person, for instance, if you have meiser animal, so you could actually use something that is for tithing. You could give what is tithing as a donation. Say this is going to go to the temple. Even though you have the 10th, it means it could be a burnt offering and not just be the offering that you have to do for the tithing. So here he says, Kasha, a vow, you can't give a vow. For instance, Meiser Sheni. Meiser Sheni is second tithing. Second tithing is you have to bring the fruits to your fruits to Jerusalem and eat the fruits in Jerusalem. Now, let's say you don't want to. Let's say you have you live in Chelan and you own a whole bunch of apple fields. You're not interested in eating tons and tons of apples, or a truckload of apples. So you could go to Jerusalem, sell the apples, get money, but you have to use the money in Jerusalem for a barbecue, for bread, for other. It means the money, the value could be transferred, but whatever it is, it has to come down to food and food-related things in Jerusalem. So let's say you bought a truckload of apples, you sold the apples for $1,000, and now you bought an animal. So the animal is Meiser Sheni now. It moves over. So the fruits become permitted, but now the animal becomes the Meiser Sheni. And then you say, you know what? I want to give this Meiser Sheni to the temple as a gift. So you could fulfill your gift to the temple from Meiser. If you, let's say, I have a vow. You made a vow yesterday, 2 weeks ago, a month ago, half a year ago. I have to bring an animal to the temple. And then you bring Meiser Sheni. And you sell the money, the apples, you get the money, and you say, you know what? And now I have to buy something with the animal. I'm going to with something with the money. I'm going to buy an animal and use it to fulfill my vow of bringing a carbon. I'm going to kill two birds with one stone, no pun intended, right? So you can't do that because you can't. If you have a vow, you have to bring it from your own property. You can't use Meiser Sheni to bring it. So Rashi says, why don't we mention that as a difference? That in a dava, donation, a gift, you could give from Meiser Sheni. But in neder, you can't fulfill your obligation of a vow from Meiser. But Meiser says that you're going to give a carbon. What does it mean, give a carbon? You're going to give a carbon, you're going to give a gift to the temple. And a vow you have to bring from mundane value or monies or things. You can't use Meiser to fulfill a vow. By the way, this halacha goes into a lot of questions. The question is, if you have Meiser money, could you use Meiser money as a donation that you gave to a shul? I mean, there's obviously it's not the stage, it's not the platform for these questions, but this question comes up in other scenarios, like if you have a vow, you take a misha berach, could you pay a misha berach with Meiser money? So obviously that's discussed Shulchan Aruch to discuss that, but that's basically the similar question. V'neder any ba'alim min achule. V'kivin damer harelei neder, and if a person says that this is what I take upon myself, that's a neder, and therefore that's another difference. So Tosfos answers that why didn't we mention that as well? Because here we're not talking about all the differences. We're talking about if you already have a carbon. It doesn't make a difference if the carbon came from chulin and if it was a neder, or if the carbon came from meiser and it was an adava, the gift. What other responsibilities do you have? That there's no difference in how you prepare the carbon. But you haven't yet designated the animal, there's many differences. So therefore, we're only discussing the differences once the animal's already been set aside. Inami, another reason Tosfos answers, the Tani V'Shayr. Okay, this is what the Rashba says. That the Mishnah just mentions certain things, doesn't include all differences. When he the ein bein ka'amar, even the language doesn't make sense. The ein bein means there is no other difference. That's the literal translation. So how can you say the Mishnah says there's no other difference and not mention all the differences? The have tafka kedamar b'meruba. Mikol makom, like we have in the Gemara Baba Kama says ein bein means it should be only this, no other differences. Mikol makom lekashim sechas tainas eshkachan ein bein d'shayr deka'amar bein shalish emtzayis v'chitei matani v'shayr v'ein bein ketani uparach v'tispra ein bein dafka. That talks about the cases of fasting. Tainus is fasting for rain. That when there's no rain, so you fast. The Gemara Tainus and the Mishnah Tainus says you have to start making groups of fasts. So you have the first group, the second group, third group. So the Mishnah trying to say, what's the difference in what you're prohibited to do during the fast? So this also uses the language of Ein Bain, and it leaves out some things. Like, for instance, it leaves out Teva, V'shayir Teva, that if they would take the bima out to the street to make it how severe the fast is, because we're crying for rain, so it doesn't mention that. Why? Because we leave out something. So from the Gemara Text, we see that we say Ein Bain, there is no difference between the first group, the second group of fast, and the third group of fast, even though we don't include all things. So we say the language Ein Bain is not exact. That's the easiest way to get out of this question, because Ein Bain literally means there is no difference. Okay, let's see what Rav Stein does. See Tosfos, who questions why the Mishnah does not mention other differences between vow and offering and a gift offering. Tosfos, tractate Bava Kama, cites additional answers. One is that that the Mishnah is referring to a bird brought as a burnt offering, with regard to which there are no other differences between the two. So if it's a bird, not an animal, so there is no other difference. A second answer is given according to the Rashba, who explains that despite the formulation, the difference is only the Mishnah does not presume to define all the differences between the items compared. So even though it says Ein Bain, like we said, Tosfos says, it doesn't mean everything. Rather, the comparison is concerning a specific issue of responsibility. In our case, responsibility. That approach solves several comments of later authorities who noted additional differences. Okay, if you're going to go according to the Rashba and Tosfos, so then it saves us, because it basically says we're not including other things. Okay, we have 10 minutes. Let's go further. Another thing is, when it comes to vows, we learned in Rosh Hashanah, I think, that there's a machlekes and there's a mission in Rosh Hashanah about when do you have to bring a vow? Like, how late could you be on a vow if someone makes a donation to the temple? That's why, by the way, some people are very conscious when they say beli neder. I was in a shul, a guy got an aliyah, so they made a misha berach. So the guy says, "Okay, before we start anything, beli neder. I'm not taking any neder here. I don't want to have the obligations of a neder that includes a vow, and all of a sudden there's a whole bunch of restrictions on me. Beli neder, without taking any vow, I'm pledging to give so and so to the synagogue." So that's why people say, if someone tells you, "Could you help me?" You say, "Bli neder." I'm not taking a vow. That's why we have this concept in this lingo in Yiddishkeit, bli neder, because when a person says something, it could come off as a vow, and then you have a certain levels of responsibility. One of the responsibilities is Baal Te'acher. How late could you be? When you make a donation to the synagogue or to the Beis HaMikdash, you can't just bring it in 5 years from now. So there's a machlekes. How many Yom Tovim? Okay, you don't live in the temple, so you don't have to bring it tomorrow. But comes Sukkot, when everyone goes to the temple, you have to bring it. So when do you start going transgressing the prohibition of Baal Ta'achar? Don't be too late. Don't be late on your obligations. So the Gemara says, but based on the fact that the Mishnah doesn't mention Baal Ta'achar, means that both of them are the same, have the same rules. Zev Zeshav. Halin Baal Ta'achar, Rashi says, Afgag the Nedava Bikra, the Baal Ta'achar like Siva, even though in the Mishnah, in the Torah, it talks about don't be late on your obligation. It's talking about a vow, not a donation, not a gift. But that, like I said, in Rosh Hashanah, we talk about that Baal Te'acher applies even to gifts. So if you gift something to a shul, you have to know it's not something you can just pay up at any time. Most people are careful to make sure it's paid up before Yom Tov. All right, here he's in a quote like this. The source for this prohibition is in Devarim 23:22. One violates the prohibition when he fails to fulfill his commitment before 3 pilgrim festivals pass from the time it was pledged. This is machlekes when we start from Pesach. Is Rameir, the Chacham, for those who have a memory from Rosh Hashanah. If Shuki was here, he would correct us. The prohibition applies to all obligatory offering, tithings, gifts, and pledges to the temple's treasury. Moreover, this prohibition also applies to pledges to charity, that you can't just give a pledge to charity and not pay it, and the like, which must also be honored within the same period of time, which means you can't pass 3 holidays. Again, if it's 3 holidays when you donated, or 3 holidays from the first holiday. That's a machlekes in the Mishnah. But Rabbi Steinsaltz writes over here in the note, 3 holidays. So it means he's taking, I guess that's the halacha. Halacha is any 3 holidays whenever you make a donation. If you make a donation, let's say now, today, if you were making a donation to Shul, so you can't let it pass Sukkot, Pesach, and Shavuos. You have an up until next Shavuos, that's to pay it up. But once it passes Shavuos, you went 3 holidays and you haven't paid your obligations. Okay, so the Gemara says as follows. All right. Hopefully, maybe we could just we'll go quickly to the end of the Gemara. Then we're going to go to next week. We have to learn the very complicated laws between the laws of Zava and Zav of body emissions. Okay. Tanan Hasim we learned Ezu neder. What is the definition of a vow? If a person says, "I take upon myself to do X, Y, and Z." Ezi nedava. What does it mean? A gift. This. Okay, so if a person you have charities that say you could donate your old car. So if you donate your old car and I don't know, something happens, this car gets washed away, you're not obligated to give another car because you donated this car. The car is not available anymore. So then the dove is gifting a specific thing. Haraya life says, if a person says, "I take upon myself to donate a car," and your mind was to donate the car you have in your garage, and then something happens and the car is no longer available for donation, you have to find another car because you said you took upon yourself the responsibility to bring a car to the temple or to the shul. What's the difference? What happens if the thing dies or gets stolen? Or gets lost? If you made a vow, even if you designated this car or this animal, you got to bring another one. You have to find a replacement. But if I make a gift, when the gift dies, or nignavu or gets lost, stolen, or gets lost, and I don't have to bring another one. I donated this. This is not here anymore. So Rav Sheinzat says, if one says it is incumbent upon me to bring an offering, or it's incumbent upon me to bring the value of a certain object as an offering, that is a vow offering, and therefore you have to bring it whether the monies that you had is available or not. However, if one says it is incumbent upon me to bring this animal, or is incumbent upon me to bring the value of this object, that is a gift offering. And that's a chiddush. The chiddush that he's saying over here from the Rambam Sefer Avoda, even if he says the value of this object and the object is not there anymore, that's called a nedav, not a neder. Okay. Menani mili. How do we know? The Tanu Rabbanan and our rabbis have taught v'nirtzah lechaper alav. Rabbi Shimon Omer es she'olav chai b'churusay. V'nirtzah he'll be accepted. Means God will have a ratzain to find this person an atonement. So esh olav loy olav means what you obligated. If you've taken upon yourself a responsibility, you have to bring. You're responsible to replace it. You took responsibility to bring it. But if it's not upon you, it's just this item. You don't have to bring it. So Rashi says, esh olav chai b'churusay hachi darash le'likrav v'nirtzalay nedarim that your neder will be accepted. She is chaper behen when you atone yourself with it. Havi nirtza av mikamek kapara, but before you get an atonement. Loi nirtza ube'eze karban amarti l'cha ba'isa shalav anu alav dafka. Alav the krah dafka. Okay, this Rashi is an important Rashi. We don't have time to go to the details, but Rashi basically says, when is it nirtza? By kapara. Kapara means atonement. It has to make it to the mizbeach. Just bringing the animal to the Beis Hamikdash and saying it's not my problem anymore, the Kohanim have it. Like when it comes to the Machzah Shekel, for instance, if let's say a city sends half coins to the temple for the obligations of Machzah Shekel, so there's also a level of achrayis, but what happens if you give it to the Kohen and the Kohen brings it in? There's different levels of achrayis. When do I no longer have an obligation? So Rashi takes it kapara. It has to actually bring atonement. If it hasn't brought atonement, you have to bring a replacement. Apparently, this is derived from the meaning of the term upon him, which is an expression of personal responsibility. Ritva explains that it is derived from the fact that the term upon him is superfluous in this context. He didn't have to say the word. So it's an addition to the word, therefore the Torah comes to teach us. My mashma, Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avidimi came the Amralai commanded ta'in aksafi dami. What does this mean? So Rabbi Yitzchak, the son of Dimi, says that by saying Allah, this is me, it's as if you put it on your shoulders. And therefore, the Allah v'kabel achrais, it means you took upon yourself responsibility. And therefore, according to Rashi, it means not everyone agrees with Rashi. But according to Rashi, it means that it has to actually make it to to the temple. Others say that it's that once you bring it to it has to actually make it to the mizbeach. Others say that it's I think the Mishnah Malach says. The Rambam says it has to actually be sacrificed. Others disagree with Rashi. Tosfos and Chulin says that as long as you bring it to the Azara, to the sanctuary, then that's you fulfilled your vow. Okay. I remember difficult Gemara. We had some difficult Tosfos in, but I think we got some good ideas here. Next week it's gonna be a complicated next Mishnah in Zav between two experiences of Zav versus 3 and the Korban and all that, and we learned the laws, and we'll tackle that Be'ez Hashem next week. Thank you everyone so much for joining, and see you Be'ez Hashem next week.